talk about billions abroad and cuts here at home.
Vlogging pod starts like a conversation. Cup of coffee with no destination. Just voices trying to understand what's happening across this land. From your stories told to the pages turned. Every question, every word, supported by SheSharesStudios.net.
Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. When people hear that there's not enough funding for healthcare, childcare, food assistance, or rural hospitals here in the United States, it raises a bigger question about priorities. Because at the same time, Americans are being told that certain programs need to be scaled back or cut entirely. Congress continues to approve long-term funding commitments overseas. So today, we're going to walk through what those commitments actually look like, where the money goes, and how that compares to what's happening here at home. Let's start with the domestic side. In recent policy discussions, including what has been referred to as the One Beautiful Big Bill, there have been projections that would significantly reduce funding from programs like SNAP, which helps families afford food, and Medicaid, which provides health care for millions of Americans. Reports tied to congressional budget analysis have suggested that changes could reduce access to benefits for millions of people over time. That's where the conversations around "we can't afford it" tends to come from. Now let's shift that lens out. In the United States, we provide long-term foreign aid to several countries. And while each one is tied to different strategic goals, the funding itself is very real and very consistent. Israel is one of the most well-known examples. The U.S. provides about $3.8 billion per year to Israel under a 10-year agreement that runs through 2026. This funding is primarily military aid. And here's the important part that often gets overlooked. A large portion of that money is structured to be spent on American-made defense equipment. So while it is aid to Israel, it is also feeds directly back into U.S. defense contractors and military production here at home. That support has been consistent for decades, which is what makes Israel unique compared to other countries. It's not tied to a temporary war or short-term crisis. It's a long-term, built-in commitment. Now, when people talk about it, they talk about how the relationship is maintained politically. One of the names that comes up often is AIPAC, AIPAC. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, is a pro-Israel lobbying organization that works to influence U.S. policy and strengthen the relationship between two countries. Many lawmakers receive campaign support that is influenced by pro-Israel donor networks and political action committees aligned with those interests. And a number of elected officials maintain ongoing connections with those groups. This is part of the broader lobbying and campaign finance and system in the United States, where organizations advocate for policies and support candidates who align with their positions. Now, Israel isn't the only country receiving U.S. aid. Ukraine has received tens of billions of dollars since 2022, following the Russian invasion. That funding has come in waves and includes military equipment, economic support, humanitarian aid. Unlike Israel, This is not a steady yearly agreement, but rather emergency funding tied to an active conflict. Egypt receives about $1.3 billion per year in military aid from the United States. This goes back to long-standing agreements tied to regional stability following the Camp David Accords. That funding continues consistently, even amid ongoing debates about human rights concerns. Jordan is another long-term recipient, receiving roughly $1 to $1.4 billion annually in a mix of military and economic support. Jordan is considered a key ally in maintaining regional stability, particularly given its geographic position and the pressures it faces from surrounding conflicts. Then there's Afghanistan, which tells a different story. During the U.S. military presence from 2001 to 2021, Afghanistan received massive funding, including military support, infrastructure investment, and government backing. And the U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban takeover, that funding shifted. Today, aid is largely limited to humanitarian assistance, even that has faced disruptions, cuts, especially in areas like healthcare and food programs. So when you put all of this together, the question becomes less about whether foreign aid exists and more about consistently it is protected compared to domestic programs. Because when leaders talk about America first, it raises a fair question. If funding is limited and difficult choices have to be made, why do certain international commitments remain stable year after year while programs that directly impact Americans are often the first on the chopping block? That doesn't mean every dollar of foreign aid is unnecessary. Each of these relationships is tied to strategy, alliances, and global influence. But it does highlight a pattern. Military aid and foreign policy priorities tend to remain steady, while domestic support systems are more frequently debated, reduced, and restructured. And that's where the real conversation begins. Not just what we spend, but what we choose to protect. Today's sources come from the Associated Press. GOP mega bill would slash SNAP benefits by $186 billion over 10 years. Associated Press. Trump administration freezes most foreign aid but spares Israel and Egypt military funding. U.S. facts. How much military aid does the U.S. give to Israel? Federal Election Commission campaign finance data portal. Reuters. U.S. grants Egypt $1.3 billion in military aid despite rights concern. U.S. Department of State. U.S. Jordan Memorandum of Understanding on Strategic Partnership. Associated Press. Aid cuts disrupt Afghanistan health and food programs. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye-bye for now.